A morning full of turmoil. It was one of those mornings where everything seemed calm, but felt wrong. The air was crisp and clear, sunlight leaking through the tired cityscape as the couple, Hannah and Ryan, cruised along the winding suburban road in their vintage blue sedan. It was supposed to be a simple, relaxing drive to a lakeside cabin, just the two of them. A welcome escape from the relentless grind of the city. Hannah stared out the passenger window, her fingers drumming against her knee, mind tangled in a web of unsaid grievances. Ryan, meanwhile, was gripping the steering wheel a notch tighter than needed, his jaw stiff. Neither spoke. The radio was low, a soft hum in the icy silence between them. "You know, we always plan these things because you think they'll fix everything." Hannah finally broke the silence, her voice cutting through with an undertone of frustration. "And you never give them a chance to actually work," Ryan shot back, visibly trying to keep his tone steady but failing to hide the irritation crackling in his words. The words were embers. What started as a spark swiftly evolved into a full-blown flame. Accusations flew back and forth, old issues resurfacing, things left unresolved for far too long. Each word only added to the emotional bonfire burning between them. "Pull over," Hannah demanded, her eyes glaring daggers. "What? Are you serious? We're miles away from anything." Ryan's knuckles turned pale as he hesitated, his foot reluctantly easing onto the brake. "I can't do this anymore, Ryan. Just pull over," she repeated, her tone unwavering this time. The car jerked to a halt on the side of a seemingly empty stretch of road lined with dense woods. Without waiting for him to respond, Hannah flung the door open, stepping out onto the gravel. Her heels crunched against the pebbles as she stormed ahead without looking back, her silhouette quickly fading into the row of silent pines. "Hannah, wait!" Ryan called after her, yanking off his seatbelt. But she was gone, swallowed by the shadows of the forest before he could even fully process what just happened. For a moment he just stood there by the car, stunned, staring at the spot where she disappeared. "This can't be real," he muttered under his breath, feeling the weight of something intangible loom over him. The morning sun had lost its warmth, casting long, eerie shadows as Ryan reluctantly settled back into the driver's seat. His mind raced with questions, but he pushed them aside. "She'll come back," he told himself. "She always came back." Little did he know this time would be very, very different. The husband's report. 2 days after Hannah's disappearance, Ryan found himself seated in the worn leather chair of the local police station. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow over the cluttered desks and lazy ceiling fans. He looked out of place, his usually well-kept appearance marred by disheveled hair and a shirt wrinkled from days of frantic worry. His leg bounced uncontrollably as Officer Delgado settled into the chair across from him, a notebook and pen in hand. "So, Mr. Carter," Delgado began, his voice a balance of professionalism and empathy, "you've come to report your wife missing. Why don't you start from the beginning? Tell me everything." Ryan exhaled deeply, clasping his hands together in an effort to steady himself. We were driving to the cabin, you know, just to get some time away. Things have been tense lately. I thought the trip would help." Delgado raised an eyebrow but said nothing, letting Ryan continue. "On the drive there, we started arguing. I don't even remember what triggered it, but—" Ryan hesitated, his voice faltering. "It escalated. She got upset, really upset, so she asked me to pull over." "You pulled over then?" Delgado prompted, scrutinizing Ryan's expression carefully. "Yes," Ryan nodded quickly. "We were on this empty stretch of road near the woods, and I thought she just needed some air, you know? But—" he swallowed hard, the words almost refusing to come out. "She walked into the forest and she didn't come back." Delgado leaned back slightly in his chair, his pen scratching against the notepad. "You didn't follow her?" "I did," Ryan protested, his voice rising before he caught himself and lowered it again. "I called out to her, walked a little ways in, but—" His eyes darted downward, his hands fidgeting. "It was like she just vanished. I waited by the car for over an hour thinking she'd cool off and come back, but she didn't. I even drove up and down the road hoping to spot her somewhere. Nothing." Delgado glanced up from his notes, his gaze steady and probing. "And you didn't call anyone right away? No friends, no family?" Ryan's face reddened slightly. I thought she needed space. Hannah has always been like that. She needs time to calm down. I didn't want to overreact, but when she didn't come home that night—" He trailed off, his voice cracking with emotion. "I see," Delgado murmured. "And that was how long ago?" 2 days. Ryan's voice was barely above a whisper. The officer nodded, noting the timeline. Did you notice anything unusual before the trip? Anything odd about her behavior? Ryan hesitated, his brow furrowing in thought. Not really. I mean, we've been under stress lately. Work's been rough and... He stopped, biting his lip as if weighing whether to say more. She'd been distant recently, but I thought it was normal, just... life. Delgado's pen stilled on the notepad. Mr. Carter, when was the last time you actually spoke with your wife? I mean, really spoke, not argued? Ryan's silence answered the question before he could. I don't know, he admitted, looking more defeated than ever. The officer closed his notebook and leaned forward, his expression softening just slightly. Ryan, we're going to do everything we can to find her, but I'll need your full cooperation. You ready for that? Yes, Ryan said firmly, though his voice still carried the weight of doubt. Good. First things first, you'll need to retrace every step you took that day. I mean every detail, no matter how small or insignificant it seems. Delgado stood up, signaling the end of the initial interview. And Ryan, if there's anything else, anything you might be holding back, now's the time to say it. Ryan's eyes flicked up to meet Delgado's. There was a flicker of something there, fear, desperation, guilt, but he gave a quick shake of his head. I've told you everything. Delgado's jaw tightened ever so slightly, but he nodded and gestured for Ryan to follow him. Let's take another look at the map of the area. Maybe something will jog your memory. As Ryan stood and followed Delgado into the adjoining room, his heart thudded heavily in his chest. He'd told them what happened, at least, most of it. But even as he tried to convince himself he had nothing to hide, a gnawing doubt lingered in the pit of his stomach. Little did he know, the officers were already beginning to suspect there might be more to his story than what he was letting on. The initial investigation. The morning sun was just beginning to rise when 2 patrol cars rolled down the narrow, winding road near the woods where Ryan claimed Hannah had disappeared. Officer Delgado and his team were the first to arrive, their flashlights cutting through the early morning fog as they surveyed the stretch of road. It was eerily quiet, with only the sound of crunching gravel underfoot and sporadic bird calls breaking the silence. Delgado pulled out his notepad and gestured to Officer Whitaker, who was standing just behind him. This is the spot Ryan mentioned, right? Yeah, right here, Whitaker confirmed, glancing at the GPS coordinates on his phone. About 3 miles from the nearest gas station and not a camera in sight. It's practically the middle of nowhere. Delgado squatted by the shoulder of the road, examining the area closely. The road was lined with dense trees on both sides, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked most of the light. He ran his gloved fingers lightly over the gravel, noting the faint depressions left by tire tracks. Doesn't look like there's been much traffic through here, Delgado murmured, more to himself than anyone else. He stood up and turned to Whitaker. Did the husband say anything about her being upset before she got out of the car? Yeah, he said they were arguing, Whitaker replied, flipping through his notebook. He claimed she was frustrated and that's why she stormed off. He said she needed space, but... Whitaker hesitated, lowering his voice. Honestly, it doesn't sound right to me. If she was that upset, why would she wander into the woods instead of heading back down the road, and why didn't he follow her further in? Delgado pressed his lips into a thin line. Exactly. Something about this feels off. By mid-afternoon, the team had expanded the search area. Officers combed through the woods in neat, methodical rows, calling out Hannah's name. K-9 units had been brought in, their handlers encouraging the dogs to pick up a scent from a scarf Ryan had provided. But hours passed, and there was nothing. No signs of struggle, no discarded belongings, no footprints leading deeper into the forest. Whitaker! One of the officers called out, waving his hand as Delgado and Whitaker jogged over to where he was standing. What is it? Delgado asked, slightly out of breath. The officer pointed to a patch of grass near the edge of the trees. Tire tracks. Fresh ones leading back onto the main road. The soil's damp enough that they're pretty distinct. Whitaker knelt down, inspecting the tracks closely. These are different from the ones near where the husband said he parked. And look. He pointed to a faint indentation in the grass. It looks like something heavy was dragged from here back to the road. Delgado frowned and scratched his head. That's interesting. But it doesn't prove anything just yet. Bag this area and get photos. We'll have forensics analyze it. As the search continued, another officer approached Delgado, his expression troubled. Sir, we've checked the gas station and convenience store near here, like Carter mentioned. We reviewed the security footage from the cameras for that day. And? Delgado prompted. And Hannah Carter never walked into that store. Actually, no one did. The whole area was practically deserted all day except for one car. The officer glanced down at his report. The husband's car! Delgado's gut tightened. Something wasn't adding up. He motioned for the officer to hand him the report and scanned it quickly. The husband swore she went into the store, Delgado muttered, his jaw tightening. Why lie about something like that? They also ran credit card activity, the officer continued. If she'd purchased something, there'd be a record, but there's nothing. Delgado let out a long sigh, his mind racing. All right, he said, his voice firm. Keep the search going for now, but I want a deeper look into Ryan Carter. Pull his phone records, bank transactions, anything that might tell us where he's been and what he's been doing. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, the woods were bathed in the dim glow of police floodlights. Delgado stood at the edge of the search zone, his hands on his hips as he surveyed the scene. Officers moved in and out of the trees, their voices faint against the rustling leaves. Whitaker approached him, his face lined with fatigue. Still nothing, no clothes, no phone, no signs of her anywhere. It's like she just disappeared into thin air, Delgado finished, his tone grim. He turned to look back at the road. I don't like this. Something's not right, and I have a feeling Ryan Carter knows more than he's letting on. Whitaker nodded in agreement. What's the next move? We bring him back in, Delgado said, his voice decisive. He's hiding something, and we're going to find out what it is. Suspicion, from the clues. In the late afternoon after their extensive search in the woods, Officer Delgado and Officer Whitaker returned to the precinct, their minds buzzing with questions. They spread their findings out on the large corkboard in the briefing room. Photographs of tire marks, sketches of the surrounding area, and a printed timeline of Ryan Carter's movements were pinned to the board. Delgado stared at it all, arms folded, his brow furrowed deep. None of this is adding up. The story Ryan's told us? It's got more holes than Swiss cheese. Let's go through it again. Whitaker leaned back against the desk, flipping through his notepad. Okay, so Ryan says they argued, she got emotional, and she stormed out. She went towards the convenience store, right? That's his version. He looked up at Delgado. Right, Delgado responded, tapping his finger on a photo of the gas station's grainy security footage. But Hannah never entered the store. Hell, she never even made it to the parking lot. The only thing the footage shows is Ryan's car idling on the shoulder for almost an hour. He says he waited for her. For what? A ghost? Did she vanish into thin air? Whitaker nodded and added, and the fact that we have no eyewitness accounts of her walking or even being anywhere near that store is peculiar. You said it yourself this morning, Delgado. People disappearing like that? Not likely. Not without somebody noticing. Delgado walked to the board and tapped on the corner of the map pinned there. Let's not forget about the extra tire tracks we found near the woods. Those weren't from Ryan's car and they didn't look too old. Who else was out there and what were they doing on that stretch of road? Whitaker sighed. This whole case feels staged, doesn't it? Like the guy took cues from some crime movie and thought no one would notice the inconsistencies. Delgado tilted his head slightly, considering that for a moment. Either he's an amateur who's panicking, or he thinks he's way smarter than us. I'm not ruling out the possibility someone else is involved yet, though. I can't shake the feeling this is bigger than just him. Speaking of staged, Whitaker interjected, pulling a fold of papers from his folder. How about those missing person flyers Carter printed? Have you looked at them closely? Delgado frowned. Just briefly. Something about them bothering you? Yeah. Whitaker flipped through one until he found what he was looking for and held it up. Here, notice anything missing? Delgado narrowed his eyes at the flyer and then it dawned on him. No phone number? Exactly. Whitaker smirked grimly. The only contact information on here is his email address. What kind of family prints missing person flyers without a phone number? If someone sees Hannah walking on a sidewalk or at another store, you think they're going to bother with writing an email? They'd want to call someone immediately. Delgado leaned back with a heavy exhale, his hands on his hips. That's bizarre, I'll give you that. Most families plaster their cell numbers, police hotline numbers, anything on these things. It's like he doesn't actually want to make it easy for anyone to find her. Exactly, Whitaker said, letting the papers flop back into his folder. And think about this, his actions from the start have been half-hearted at best. If your wife disappears in the woods, wouldn't most people call the police immediately? This dude waits 2 whole days. 2 days. He's either hiding something or he's the coldest damn husband I've ever seen. Delgado started pacing. He'd been working cases for years, and instinct was telling him this wasn't a random disappearance. I still don't get why the house was wiped so clean, he said, pivoting mid-step and pointing at the board again. No fingerprints, no hair, nothing you'd expect to see in a family home with a toddler running around. Carter claims Hannah's obsessive about cleanliness, but not to the degree our forensics team found. That place was practically a crime scene, Whitaker. Just without a body. Whitaker flipped a pen between his fingers, leaning forward again. And let's not forget the scarf Ryan gave the K9 team to track her scent. Did I hear right that it didn't even lead anywhere deep into the woods? That's correct, Delgado said, rubbing his chin. It only led back to the car. Her scent didn't go past the shoulder, which is strange considering she allegedly walked off into the forest. Whitaker spoke slowly as if piecing it together out loud. So, either she never got out of that car or she was picked up by someone else. But if that's the case, where's the proof? Delgado stopped pacing and turned to Whitaker, his eyes sharp and focused. We'll have proof soon enough. Here's what we'll do. Pull Carter's cell phone records and GPS history. I want to know every ping from his phone, every place he stopped. Re-interview gas station employees, local residents, anyone who might have seen something he didn't tell us about. That guy's lying, Whitaker. I can feel it, but we need more than feelings to nail him. And the wife? Whitaker asked. Delgado's face grew dark. She's out there somewhere. Maybe alive, maybe not. Either way, I'm going to find out what happened. And if Ryan Carter is involved, we're going to make sure he doesn't get away with it. The two exchanged a knowing look, understanding the long road ahead. As Delgado glanced back at the board one last time, the pieces of the puzzle began to form in his mind, though the full picture remained frustratingly out of reach. The wife's mysterious whereabouts. By the 5th day of the investigation, the case had only grown more puzzling. Officer Delgado and Officer Whitaker sat across from each other in the sparsely lit precinct conference room, the air thick with frustration. On the table between them lay a disarray of evidence, maps, photographs, reports, and timelines that all seemed to contradict each other. Delgado rubbed his temple, staring at the map of the area pinned to the board. 5 days, and not a single damn clue pointing to where she went. Whitaker sat back in his chair, tapping a coffee cup against the table with idle frustration. We've searched the woods twice. The K9S couldn't find a trail beyond the car. No one's reported a sighting nearby, and every camera within a 50-mile radius is a dead end. It's like she disappeared into another dimension. Or like she didn't walk into the woods at all, Delgado muttered under his breath, half to himself. Whitaker straightened up. You don't think she went in? Delgado shrugged, turning to face him. Think about it, Whitaker. Everyone we've talked to. We're talking gas station clerks, hikers, motorists. None of them saw her. Not even walking along the main road. Wouldn't someone have seen her going into the woods or at least nearby? Whitaker nodded thoughtfully, but his brow was furrowed in doubt. It's strange, I'll admit that. But where the hell did she go then? Ryan's car was sitting there for an hour. Even if someone picked her up, why haven't we found any witnesses or even tire tracks that make sense? Delgado picked up a file and flipped through it, his tone growing sharper. And let's not forget the reports from her friends and family. They all tell nearly the same story. Hannah wasn't happy. She was tired, distant, almost like... He trailed off, his mind running in different directions. Like she wanted to disappear, Whitaker finished for him. Delgado gave him a hard look. It's one theory, but if she did, she must have planned it pretty damn well. No phone activity, no credit card use, no last-minute emails. People don't just vanish without leaving some kind of trace. Whitaker reached for his notebook, flipping back to his notes from their interview with Ryan. What about the husband's story? Maybe there's a clue buried in there we're not seeing. He said they argued about something before she got out. Maybe whatever they were fighting about holds the key. That's what I've been thinking too, Delgado said, his brow furrowing deeper. But every time we try questioning him, he just repeats the same vague nonsense. We argued about life stress or she needed time to think. Those aren't answers. Those are excuses. Whitaker let out a low whistle. Man's poker face is solid though, I'll give him that. You think he's covering for her or covering for himself? Before Delgado could answer, another officer popped his head into the room, clutching a folder. Hey Delgado, we got the neighbors' interviews from their apartment complex. You're gonna want to see this. Delgado gestured for him to come in. What'd they say? The officer handed over the folder, his face grim. Couple folks mentioned hearing arguing late at night a few days before this all happened. One neighbor swears she heard something break, glass maybe, in their apartment, but no one wanted to stick their nose too far in it. Also, the officer hesitated. Also what? Delgado pressed, his voice snapping like a whip. There's a report of a woman, matching Hannah's description, seen at a bus station 2 towns over, alone, late at night. She was sitting on a bench looking scared. Whitaker leaned forward, his expression hardening. A bus station? Why are we only hearing about this now? The officer raised his hands defensively. It only came through after a bus station employee recognized her photo on one of those flyers we put up. Apparently she was only there for about 20 minutes before walking off. No one knows if she got on a bus or where she went after that. Delgado sucked in a breath, his mind working through the new information. All right, Whitaker, get in touch with that bus station employee. See if they remember anything specific. What she was wearing, who she might have talked to, anything unusual. And check if the station has cameras running. I want every angle of her time there. On it, Whitaker said, already pulling out his notebook. But this changes things, doesn't it? If she was at the station, this wasn't a random disappearance. If she wanted to get away from Ryan, she could have planned to leave on her own. Delgado nodded, but his expression remained grim. Maybe she was meeting someone there. You mean like an accomplice? Whitaker asked, skeptical. Not necessarily, Delgado said, standing and pacing again. Could have been someone she trusted, someone who promised to help her, or someone who lured her there under false pretenses. Whitaker let out a low sigh, tapping his pen against the desk. Hell of a lot of possibilities piling up on us. We're chasing smoke, Delgado. We'll find the fire, Delgado shot back. His voice carried a quiet, determined edge as he stopped pacing and stared out the window at the fading daylight. Hannah's out there somewhere. It's just a matter of figuring out who knows where, and why they're lying to us. The impossibly perfect apartment. It was late in the afternoon when Delgado and Whitaker decided to visit the Carter apartment again. On paper, it made sense to take a closer look. They had been so focused on the woods and the road, trauma dogs sniffing through leaves and officers sweating through endless searches, that they hadn't given much consideration to where Ryan and Hannah had lived. But something about the way Ryan described Hannah, meticulously clean to the point of obsession, stuck with Delgado. People like that usually left their homes extremely personal, a reflection of their quirks or life together. What if the apartment revealed the part of the story Ryan wasn't telling them? They stood outside the beige door of apartment 3B, its number nearly peeling off due to years of negligence from the landlord. Delgado adjusted his belt, wrapped his knuckles against the door, and waited. I still don't get why he didn't just invite us in the first time we came here, Whitaker muttered, crossing his arms. Delgado shrugged. Because he didn't want us looking too closely, he replied, his jaw tight. Moments later, Ryan opened the door. His face was pale, his expression tight and drained. Oh, he said, his voice catching slightly. I wasn't expecting you guys to, come by again. We figured your place might jog something useful, Delgado said nonchalantly, but his gaze was already flicking past Ryan into the apartment's interior. From the doorway, it already didn't look right. Mind if we come in? Ryan hesitated, a flicker of something, panic, crossing his face before he stepped aside. Sure, yeah, come on in. Delgado and Whitaker stepped inside, and everything about the apartment struck them as wrong, very wrong. Wow, Whitaker said under his breath, his eyes trailing the living room. This is, something. Every inch of the apartment was pristine like a catalog showroom, immaculately vacuumed carpet, countertops free of so much as a smudge, and the faint but unmistakable smell of cleaning chemicals lingering in the air. Even the framed photos on the wall looked too neatly arranged, like someone had measured the distance between each one with a ruler. There was something unnervingly sterile about it all. Your wife kept things pretty tidy, huh? Delgado said casually, running a hand along the back of the sofa. His finger came away clean, no dust, no residue, nothing. Yeah, Hannah was big on cleanliness, Ryan said quickly, his voice stiff. Said it helped with her anxiety. Sure, Whitaker murmured, leaning down to inspect the coffee table. Not a single fingerprint smudged the glass. It looked almost untouched, pristine to the point of implausibility. It's not just clean, though, Whitaker continued as his eyes scanned the bookshelves in the corner. It's empty. He gestured to the bookshelf, which was perfectly arranged but oddly devoid of depth. Only a handful of books were scattered on the otherwise empty shelves, and the space felt oddly hollow. Delgado straightened up, glancing toward the kitchen. You got anything cooking in here? He asked, sniffing the air. Ryan frowned. No, nothing. Just smells like bleach. Delgado's voice dipped slightly, a hint of accusation curling at the edge. Ryan's posture stiffened, but he played it off. Like I said, Hannah was really into cleaning. Whitaker walked toward the kitchen sink, peering into it, his brow furrowing. You sure she wasn't trying to clean you out of this place too? He quipped, though his tone was sharp. He turned on the faucet and sniffed the water pouring out. Clean. Too clean. Anything else we should know about her? Habits? Delgado asked, stepping into the bedroom. The bed was made so tightly that the edges of the sheets could pass a military inspection. The closet door was slightly ajar, revealing rows of meticulously organized clothes, arranged by color, of course, yet even here something felt off. Habits, Ryan echoed, following them hesitantly. I mean, no, she liked things a certain way. Delgado crouched down in front of a wastebasket near the bed. He yanked the liner out and frowned. What's this? He asked, holding up an empty roll of duct tape and a handful of discarded wipes. Ryan blanched. I don't know, cleaning maybe? I wasn't exactly keeping track of what she threw away. Right, Delgado muttered, standing back up and locking eyes with Ryan. You mind if we look through the rest of the place? Ryan's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but he nodded, his hands twitching slightly at his sides. Go ahead. I've got nothing to hide, he said, a little too quickly. Delgado took his time, moving from room to room with Whitaker a few steps behind. Each part of the apartment carried the same artificial neatness, everything perfectly placed, yet devoid of the warmth or chaos that usually marked a lived-in space. Even the bathroom lacked the usual clutter of personal toiletries or care items. Delgado, Whitaker called from the bedroom, his voice low. Delgado joined him, and Whitaker pointed to a small drawer by the bed. Inside were several prescription bottles, each labeled with Hannah's name but half empty, as if someone had stopped taking them abruptly. What do you make of this? Whitaker asked quietly. Delgado didn't respond immediately. His gaze drifted toward the window at the far side of the room, where faint smudges on the sill caught his eye. He walked over and inspected it closely. There were marks, rough, uneven ones, as if someone had pried it open. Look at this, Delgado murmured, gesturing toward the window. Whitaker squinted, then frowned. You thinking what I'm thinking? Delgado nodded. Whatever happened in this apartment, it didn't go down the way he says it did. Let's bag this, check for prints. They returned to the living room to find Ryan pacing nervously by the sofa. He looked up sharply when they entered. Find what you're looking for? He asked, his voice strained. Delgado's expression was unreadable as he grabbed his coat. Not yet, he said carefully, but we're getting closer. Family pressure and a heartbreaking truth. The tension in the air at the precinct was thick enough to cut with a knife. Officer Delgado leaned back in his chair, staring at the stack of files on his desk, all centering around Ryan and Hannah Carter. 5 days into the investigation, they had followed every lead they could think of, each twisting the case into something more complex. Yet, for Delgado, the heart of everything always circled back to the same question. What was happening behind the closed doors of the Carter household? Whitaker walked into the room, holding a manila folder stuffed with notes and reports. You're not gonna like this, he muttered, dropping the folder on Delgado's desk with a heavy thud. Delgado arched an eyebrow at him. That's becoming a theme with this case, Whitaker. What have you got? It's the interviews we did with her family and close friends, Whitaker replied, sitting down across from him. He paused for a beat, his hands clasped tightly. Turns out there was a hell of a lot more going on in that perfect marriage than the husband let on, and it's not pretty. Delgado leaned forward, intrigue flickering in his eyes. What did they say? Whitaker flipped open the folder, pulling out the top sheet. For starters, multiple sources said Hannah had been struggling with something bigger than just marital stress. Her sister Emily said Hannah suffered from obsessive-compulsive tendencies tied to cleaning. Apparently it was getting worse. She wasn't just a neat freak. She was compulsively scrubbing and sanitizing everything in sight. It was like she couldn't stop. Delgado's face darkened. That tracks with what we saw at the apartment. That place wasn't just clean, it felt lifeless. Exactly, Whitaker nodded. But here's where it gets heavy. Emily said that Ryan had been trying to help, at least in the beginning, convinced her to see a therapist, even got her some medication. But at some point he started losing patience. Emily described it as emotional distance. He was checked out, barely home some nights. Delgado let out a slow breath. And Hannah knew? Whitaker gave a grim nod. Yeah, and she took it personally. According to her friend Carrie, Hannah thought her obsession with cleaning was pushing Ryan away. She felt like she was ruining their relationship but didn't know how to stop. Carrie said that during their last phone call, Hannah broke down crying, repeating over and over, "I'm the problem. It's me." Carrie thought it was just a rough patch, but now... He trailed off, shrugging helplessly. Delgado tapped his pen on the desk, his eyes narrowing. So, we've got a wife battling severe anxiety and OCD, blaming herself for everything, and a husband who's mentally checked out. Sounds like a recipe for disaster. Wait, there's more, Whitaker said, holding up another report. Apparently Ryan didn't keep his frustrations behind closed doors. One of their neighbors at the apartment complex said they heard him on the balcony late one night shouting into his phone, something about how he was at his breaking point, and then they heard it. He said something like, "I can't deal with her anymore. I feel like I'm suffocating." Delgado frowned deeply, leaning back in his chair. Damn, sounds like he was reaching his limit. Yeah, Whitaker said, flipping to the next page. And here's the kicker. Emily also mentioned that Ryan was known to snap when under pressure. She didn't outright say he was violent, but she hinted at a temper. Said he could be cold, cruel even, during arguments. So he's bottling up his anger, she's spiraling into self-blame, and nobody is sitting down to fix anything, Delgado said, summing it up. His voice carried a mixture of frustration and pity. Hell of a way to live. Whitaker raised an eyebrow. The friends and family all say the same thing. They were crumbling behind this facade of suburban perfection. Outwardly, they looked like a happy couple, but behind the scenes, it was falling apart. Delgado stared at the corkboard on the wall, where photos of the couple and map markers teased at untold secrets. What about their financials? Stress like that doesn't just come from personal issues. Was money part of the pressure? Whitaker nodded. Bingo. Turns out Ryan hadn't disclosed this to us, but he recently lost a big account at work. He's in real estate. Word is, he was under review at his job. Meanwhile, Hannah had been pulling double shifts at the hospital and still managing the house. Friends said the balance of their relationship shifted hard in the last few months. She felt like she was the only one holding their lives together. And he felt emasculated, Delgado said flatly, reading between the lines. This guy needed control, and instead he's watching his wife do the work while he stews in his failures. Why didn't her family say any of this earlier? Whitaker shrugged. They thought she'd come through it. Said Hannah was good at masking. She didn't want anyone to know how bad things had gotten. That's the problem when everyone keeps secrets, Delgado murmured. He stood and walked toward the board, staring at Hannah's wedding photo. She was smiling in the picture, but now all he could see was the pain buried underneath it. Whitaker, if Ryan reached his breaking point, it's not hard to imagine this thing escalated, but we need something concrete to tie it all together. Agreed, Whitaker said. We're already pulling his phone records. Maybe we'll find a call or a text that sheds light on where his head was at. Keep digging, Delgado ordered, his voice determined. There's a heartbreaking truth buried in all this. The pressure, the guilt, the distance, it all led to something. I want to know exactly what. A shocking confession. Hours ticked by in the precinct's small, dimly lit interrogation room. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly, casting a sterile glow on the cold gray walls. Ryan Carter sat at the steel table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. His usually neatly combed hair was disheveled, his eyes sunken with fatigue and something more, fear perhaps. Across from him, Officer Delgado leaned forward, his gaze sharp and unrelenting. Whitaker stood in the corner of the room, arms crossed, his presence looming as a quiet, watchful shadow. You've been here for hours, Carter, Delgado said, his voice calm but firm. Your story keeps shifting, and sooner or later, the truth's going to come out. Do yourself a favor and make it sooner. Ryan's fingers twitched, but he kept his gaze fixed on the table. The weight of the silence in the room was almost unbearable. Look, Delgado continued, softening just slightly. I get it, things get messy. People make mistakes. But the longer you keep whatever it is buried, the worse it's gonna be for you. You said you loved Hannah. If that's true, then you owe her the truth. He paused, letting the words sink in. You owe it to her family, too. Ryan's jaw clenched, and he exhaled through his nose, his chest rising and falling unevenly. You don't understand, he muttered finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Then make me understand, Delgado urged, leaning closer. Help me see your side. Help me connect the dots, Ryan, because right now, nothing adds up. Ryan's head shot up, his eyes bloodshot and brimming with emotion. You think I wanted this? You think I planned for my whole life to fall apart like this? His voice cracked as he spoke, and his hands shook slightly. You think I don't wake up every day wishing I could rewind time? Whitaker uncrossed his arms and stepped forward slightly. What happened, Ryan? He asked, his tone low but steady. We know there's more to this than you're telling us. Ryan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly in his throat. He looked from Whitaker to Delgado, then back down at his trembling hands. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he murmured. Delgado exchanged a glance with Whitaker, sensing that the dam was about to break. "Take your time," Delgado said quietly. "But tell us everything. Start from the beginning." For a moment, it seemed like Ryan might retreat back into silence. Then, like floodgates giving way, the words tumbled out. "She was my entire world," Ryan began, his voice hoarse. "Hannah. She was everything. But this past year," he trailed off, shaking his head. "She wasn't the same. She wasn't my Hannah anymore. The cleaning, the anxiety, the way she'd vanish into her own head sometimes. It was like she wasn't even there." Delgado nodded, encouraging him to continue. "Go on." "I tried to help," Ryan said, his voice rising slightly as though trying to convince himself. "I got her into therapy, made sure she took her meds, but nothing worked. And then with work," his voice faltered, and he looked up at the officers, his eyes filled with despair. "I couldn't keep up. I lost clients, I lost deals, and every time I came home it was like stepping into a goddamn museum instead of a house. The smell of bleach, the silence. It felt like I was suffocating." Whitaker spoke up, his tone carefully neutral. "What happened the night she disappeared, Ryan?" Ryan sucked in a shaky breath, tears welling in his eyes. "We fought," he admitted, like really fought, the kind where you say things you can't take back. She said I didn't love her anymore, that I'd given up on her, and I told her—" He stopped, his face crumpling with guilt. "I told her she was right, that I couldn't do it anymore, that I wasn't strong enough." Delgado stayed silent, letting the gravity of Ryan's words hang in the air. "She flipped, man," Ryan continued, his voice breaking. "She lost it, started yelling, crying, throwing things. She said if I didn't want to be there anymore, I didn't have to be. She stormed out to the car. I thought she was just trying to get some air, but then she drove." "And?" Delgado pressed gently, his eyes locked on Ryan. Ryan buried his face in his hands, his voice muffled. "I followed her. I didn't know where she was going, only that she was upset and shouldn't be driving like that. She pulled off in the middle of nowhere, got out and walked toward the woods." Delgado leaned forward slightly. "And then what, Ryan? What happened when she went into the woods?" Ryan's shoulders shook as he let out a choked sob. "I went after her. I grabbed her arm, told her we needed to talk, that I wasn't going to let her just walk away like that, but she started screaming. She was out of control." He paused, his breath hitching. "I tried to calm her down, I swear, but she wouldn't stop. She was hysterical. I didn't mean to do it." Delgado's stomach sank. "Do what, Ryan?" Ryan's voice was barely audible. "She tried to push me away and He clenched his fists, his knuckles white. "I grabbed her. I thought if I just held her still she'd calm down, but she kept fighting me. And then she stopped moving." Whitaker sucked in a sharp breath, but Delgado held up a hand to silence him. I didn't think I was hurting her," Ryan said, his face twisted with anguish. "When I let go she just collapsed. I tried to wake her up. God, I tried, but she wasn't breathing, she wasn't—" Delgado's voice was calm but firm. "What did you do next, Ryan?" "I panicked," Ryan admitted. "I didn't know what to do. I put her in the car and drove. I couldn't think straight. I just kept driving until I thought of somewhere no one would find her." "Where is she, Ryan?" Delgado asked, his voice steely. "Where did you leave her?" Ryan's tear-streaked face crumpled entirely as he sobbed. "I buried her, in my parents' backyard. I didn't know what else to do." The room was silent except for Ryan's ragged breathing. Whitaker shifted uncomfortably, the enormity of the confession sinking in. Delgado stood slowly, his expression grim. "You've done the right thing by telling us, Ryan, but this doesn't end here. We need to confirm everything you just said." Ryan nodded weakly, his body slumping as though the weight of his actions had finally crushed him. "Please," he whispered. Just tell her family I'm sorry." Delgado exchanged a glance with Whitaker, both men silently acknowledging the road still ahead. For all the truth Ryan had just spilled, they still had a long way to go. Akiko is found. It was a crisp, overcast morning when Detective Delgado received the call. The grim tone of the officer on the other end told him this wasn't going to be a routine update. He was standing in the precinct's break room, sipping his second cup of lukewarm coffee, when his phone vibrated violently in his pocket. He answered mid-sip. "Delgado?" "Sir, we've got something." The voice belonged to Officer Jenkins, one of the younger members of the search team that had been combing remote areas for days. His usually measured tone was edged with unease. "Go on," Delgado said, setting his coffee down and switching to full focus. "We think we've found her." Delgado didn't need to ask who her was. He knew immediately. For days they'd been chasing the fragmented breadcrumbs of Akiko's story, the young woman who had vanished mysteriously amidst a web of secrecy. Her name had become a near constant on their lips, her face a haunting reminder pinned to every corkboard in their briefing room. "Where?" Delgado asked, already motioning for Whitaker to follow him as he grabbed his coat. "Near an abandoned sawmill on the east end of town. A hiker reported finding something unusual near a clearing in the woods, about half a mile out from the mill. We sent a team and... It's bad, sir. You should come see for yourself." "Cordoned off?" Delgado asked, not bothering to disguise his urgency. "Yes, sir. Forensics is en route and the team's locked down the site." "Good. And Jenkins, don't let anyone touch a damn thing until we get there." Delgado's voice was firm as he hung up the call. Whitaker, already slipping on his jacket, shot him a glance. "What's the update?" "We might have found Akiko. Jenkins sounds rattled, and that kid's usually calm as a rock. Let's move." The drive to the woods was heavy with unspoken tension. Delgado and Whitaker said little, the weight of possible answers pressing down on them. The precinct's car hummed along the cracked asphalt, flanked by dense foliage on either side. Whitaker broke the silence first. "You think it's her?" he asked, his eyes fixed on the road ahead as Delgado drove with purpose. "If it's not, it's one hell of a coincidence," Delgado replied, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "We've been combing that area for days. A lead like this doesn't just pop up." "Jenkins said it was bad," Whitaker murmured. "Wonder what the hell he meant by that." Delgado let out a long sigh. "Guess we're about to find out." When they arrived at the scene, the sky was a dull gray, threatening rain. Police tape flapped loosely in the breeze, marking the perimeter of a muddy clearing. A few squad cars and an unmarked van were parked haphazardly near the trailhead. Delgado and Whitaker stepped out, the ground soft beneath their shoes from the previous night's storm. Jenkins met them near the tape, his face pale, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. He looked about as rattled as Delgado had assumed he might. "What have we got?" Delgado asked, wasting no time. Jenkins gestured to the far side of the clearing where a small cluster of officers and forensic technicians were gathered. "Over there! Hiker called it in about 2 hours ago. Said they spotted something sticking out of the dirt while walking their dog. Thought it was a log at first. When they got closer, though..." Jenkins shook his head. "Well, it wasn't." Delgado's jaw tightened, but his voice remained measured. "Body?" Jenkins nodded. "Yeah, but only partially exposed. Rest was buried, shallow grave. Our guys on the scene are saying it fits Akiko's description. Clothes, build, everything, but it's rough." Whitaker furrowed his brow. "How bad?" Jenkins hesitated, then lowered his voice. "They're saying there's signs of force. Blunt trauma, maybe. Preliminary guess from the techs is that it's been about a week, give or take." Delgado exhaled through his nose, a practiced calm masking the frustration boiling beneath. "Scene compromised?" "No, sir. Hiker didn't touch the body, just called it in. We cleared the area fast." "All right," Delgado said, stepping toward the clearing. "Let's see it." The crime scene was as grim as Jenkins had described. The portion of the body visible was unmistakably human, an arm bent awkwardly at the elbow, the pale skin stained with soil. Tattered clothing clung to a half-exposed torso, the unmistakable remnants of a coat that family members had described Akiko wearing the last time they'd seen her. The rest of the grave was still intact, the surrounding dirt carefully being sifted by the forensic team. Delgado crouched near the edge of the tape, his sharp gaze scanning the area. "Anything else found nearby? Tire tracks, footprints, something we can work with?" One of the forensic officers, a woman named Dr. Harper, looked up from her examination. "Not much yet. The rain likely washed away any surface evidence, but we did pick up faint signs of a path leading deeper into the woods. Could be from whoever dumped the body here." Delgado nodded, still studying the ground as if it would reveal the answers his gut was desperately searching for. "You think they tried to cover their tracks?" Harper nodded faintly. "Looks like it, but they didn't do a great job. This grave was shallow, almost rushed. Amateurs, or... they panicked." Whitaker stepped up beside Delgado, his arms crossed, his face hard. "Someone panicked because they didn't want her found, and now that we've got her, that someone's gonna be losing a lot more than their damn composure." Delgado stood and dusted his hands off on his pants. "We need to make sure. Forensics is key here. DNA, fingerprints, cause of death." He looked at Harper. "You can confirm identity?" "We'll need time, but yes," Harper replied. "We've already collected preliminary samples." "Good," Delgado murmured, his mind already racing ahead. "If this is Akiko, we finally have the leverage we need." As they stepped back from the scene, Jenkins approached again, his eyes flicking nervously to the grave. "What's your read, sir?" Delgado paused, glancing back at the grim discovery. "It's Akiko," he said, not a hint of doubt in his voice. "Now it's a matter of figuring out who put her here, and why they thought they could get away with it." Kaito's mother is involved. The precinct was bathed in a near-midnight stillness. Papers rustled, a phone rang faintly from another desk, feet shuffled against the linoleum, tiny sounds punctuating the heavy weight of the latest revelation. Detective Delgado sat across from Officer Whitaker in the squad room, the dim light casting faint shadows across their expressions. Between them sat an open case file with a photo of Kaito Shimura clipped to the top, a clean-shaven, sharp-featured man in his early 30s, who looked more like someone who belonged on a city business card than in a criminal lineup. But for all his outward charm, Kaito's veil was beginning to crumble. And now, the focus had shifted to a surprising figure in the investigation, his mother. Whitaker leaned back in his chair, tossing his pen onto the desk. "I still can't believe it," he muttered, shaking his head. Delgado didn't take his eyes from the file. He was processing the same wave of disbelief Whitaker seemed to be swimming through. "You're telling me," he said finally, "you dig into a guy like Kaito and yeah, maybe you expect some secrets. But his mother? She's what I didn't see coming," Whitaker scoffed, his tone incredulous. "The woman's in her late 60s, Delgado, retired school teacher. Neighbors say she bakes goddamn cookies for the little kids on the block every Christmas. And now we've got her caught up in an accessory to murder case? How does that even happen?" Delgado rubbed a hand over his face, clearly exhausted but too stubborn to give up for the night. "It's not that far-fetched when you think about it," he said, his voice dipping into that calm, calculated tone he used when piecing things together aloud. "Mothers protect their own, Whitaker. It's primal. Hell, with some people, it overrides every other moral in their body." "But this?" Whitaker gestured toward the file like it might somehow shout an explanation back at him. "Helping your kid bury a body, cover up a crime? That's not maternal instinct, that's criminal conspiracy." "I get it." Delgado tapped the file. "But think about Kaito. This guy has been hiding something for months, maybe years. From what we've pieced together, he's methodical, manipulative, and smart. He knows how to play people. What if he's been playing her this whole time?" Whitaker ran a hand through his short-cropped hair, groaning under his breath. "I don't care how much of a charmer you are, Delgado. Convincing your own mother to help you cover up a murder? That's next-level manipulation." Delgado shot him a sharp look. "Have you read her statement yet?" Whitaker shook his head. "Not all of it. I was too busy combing through those phone records you sent me. What'd she say?" Delgado flipped through the file, pulling out a single-page transcript from the most recent interview with Kaito's mother, Mrs. Yumi Shimura. He skimmed over the words, jaw tightening the further down the page his eyes traveled. "She says she didn't know it was murder," Delgado began, his tone even but lined with skepticism. "Claims Kaito came to her late one night saying he'd done something terrible, something he couldn't undo. He told her he needed her help, said if the police found out it would ruin the family forever." Whitaker leaned forward, his face hardening. "And she just went along with it?" Delgado let out a heavy sigh. According to her, Kaito promised her it wasn't as bad as it sounded. He said, and I quote, "It's not what you think, Mother, just trust me." He made her believe she was helping him get rid of evidence from a business deal gone wrong, something involving stolen goods. Whitaker slapped his hand against the desk. "That's bullshit, and you know it. She had to have known something more. A body doesn't scream business deal." "Jesus, Delgado, he must have had her wrapped around his finger." "That's what I'm thinking too," Delgado admitted. "She says she didn't realize it was a corpse until after he'd buried it, but that doesn't make much sense. He drove her to the site, made her carry tools. Hell, she even brought gloves, according to her own statement. None of that screams ignorance to me." Whitaker rubbed his temples. "So, let's cut the crap. What's her angle? She's covering for him. That has to be it." "Maybe," Delgado said, leaning back in his chair, his expression dark. "Or maybe she really is just that blind when it comes to Kaito. You've read the psychological profiles on this guy. Charismatic, controlling, knows exactly how to push people's emotional buttons. If Kaito told her a sob story, played up the idea that he needed her, she might have done anything he asked without thinking twice." Whitaker let out a humorless laugh. "So now we're supposed to feel sorry for her?" "No," Delgado said firmly. "She's still guilty, Whitaker. Whether she knew the whole truth or not, she helped him hide evidence. She lied to us for weeks. She deserves to face the consequences." "Damn right she does." Whitaker crossed his arms, nodding toward the statement on the desk. "Anything else she let slip?" Delgado's fingers drummed lightly against the edge of the file as he thought. "She mentioned something about regrets, about how Kaito had changed after his father passed. She said he wasn't always like this. There was some mention of how he used to be kind, full of potential." Yeah, and now he's burying bodies in shallow graves, Whitaker shot back. Change or not, that doesn't excuse her. No, it doesn't, Delgado agreed quietly. But it does give us a clearer picture of who we're dealing with. Maybe Kaito leaned on her because out of everyone in his life, she was the only one who still believed there was good in him. He exploited that, twisted her into an accomplice. Whitaker tilted his head, thoughtful now. So, what's next? We charging her? Delgado didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Accessory after the fact, obstruction of justice. She's going down for this, Whitaker, make no mistake. But we're using her too. If anyone knows Kaito's weak spots, it's her. She's his blind spot, Whitaker, and we're gonna use it to make him crack. This version expands deeply into the moral complexities of Kaito's mother's involvement, capturing the psychological manipulation at play while painting her as a layered, if controversial, accomplice. The tension between Detective Delgado and Whitaker highlights differing views on justice and sentiment, adding rich dynamics to the scene. A just verdict. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension, the kind that seemed to linger just below the surface, ready to explode. The soft murmur of whispered conversations filled the space as reporters scribbled quick notes and photographers adjusted their cameras, waiting for the final moments of a trial that had consumed the public's attention. At the center of it all sat Kaito Shimura, his charisma and striking features now overshadowed by the gravity of the charges leveled against him. First-degree murder and conspiracy to hide evidence. Next to him was an empty seat that once belonged to his co-defendant, his mother, Yumi Shimura. She had chosen to plead guilty weeks earlier, avoiding trial but condemning herself to prison all the same. Detective Delgado leaned back in his chair near the back of the courtroom, his sharp eyes trained on Kaito. Whitaker sat beside him, fidgeting slightly, the impatience evident in the way his knee bounced up and down. The closing arguments had been delivered, the jury had deliberated for 22 hours, and now, everyone was waiting for the verdict. This is it, Whitaker muttered under his breath, his arms crossed as he leaned closer to Delgado. Think the jury's gonna see through his little drama act? Delgado didn't take his eyes off Kaito, who sat expressionless, his hands clasped neatly on the table in front of him. His defense attorney whispered something in his ear, but Kaito didn't react. He hadn't reacted much throughout the trial, maintaining a calm, almost detached demeanor. Some called it composure, Delgado called it calculated. They'll see it, Delgado replied evenly, his voice low but firm. They've seen every piece of evidence, every slip in his story. You don't manipulate your way out of DNA, Whitaker. Whitaker chuckled dryly. Doesn't mean he didn't try. The way his defense spun this thing, you'd think he was a saint just caught in the wrong situation. That's what guys like him do, Delgado said, sitting forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. They twist narratives, play on sympathy, but facts don't lie, and we gave the jury plenty of those. The bailiff's voice cut through the hum of the room. All rise. Everyone stood as Judge Matheson entered the courtroom, her black robes flowing behind her as she took her seat at the bench. The jury filed in soon after, their faces solemn. Delgado couldn't help but try to read them, searching for any hint of their decision, though he knew it was futile. Jurors were trained not to give anything away. You may be seated, the judge said, her voice steady and commanding. The foreperson of the jury, a woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor, stood with a folded piece of paper in her hands. She handed it to the bailiff, who then passed it to Judge Matheson. The silence in the room was deafening as the judge unfolded the paper, her eyes scanning the verdict. Delgado felt Whitaker shift beside him, and he threw him a quick glance. Whitaker's jaw was tight, his arms crossed even harder against his chest. This was always the hardest part, waiting for judgment, hoping the system would do its job. Judge Matheson cleared her throat. Will the defendant please rise? Kaito stood slowly, his face unreadable. Delgado thought of all the times he'd watched this man during the investigation. His confident smirk during interrogations, the way he'd shrugged off damning evidence like it was nothing. That cocky veneer wasn't there anymore. Now Kaito just looked tired. The judge turned back to the jury. Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict? Yes, Your Honor, the foreperson said. And what say you? The foreperson took a steady breath, her voice clear and unwavering. We, the jury, find the defendant, Kaito Shimura, guilty of murder in the first degree. A ripple of reactions swept through the courtroom. Gasps, whispers. A quiet sob emerged from somewhere in the gallery. But Delgado stayed focused on Kaito, watching for any sign of emotion, any crack in the mask. There it was, a slight tremor in Kaito's jaw, the faintest tightening of his lips. It wasn't much, but it was enough. the judge continued. In addition, the jury finds the defendant guilty of conspiracy to conceal evidence. As the verdicts were read, Kaito's attorney placed a hand on his arm, whispering to him again. But this time, Kaito responded with a faint shake of his head. He didn't look at his mother, seated a few rows behind him. Yumi Shimura had aged visibly over the course of the trial, her once graceful posture now slightly hunched, her eyes dark with guilt and regret. Her plea deal had ensured a lighter sentence, but her presence at every hearing made it clear she wasn't escaping the weight of what she'd done. Judge Matheson addressed Kaito directly. Mr. Shimura, this court has heard overwhelming evidence of your calculated actions, your manipulation, and your unwillingness to take accountability. You are hereby sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The words dropped like a hammer, final and unyielding. Delgado exhaled slowly, the tension that had gripped his shoulders easing just slightly. Beside him, Whitaker let out a low whistle. Damn, didn't think she'd go all the way with life without parole. Justice, Delgado said simply, though his voice lacked any sense of triumph. Cases like this never felt triumphant, even with the right outcome. Too much had been lost along the way. As the courtroom began to empty, reporters swarming like vultures toward Kaito as he was led out in handcuffs, Delgado and Whitaker remained seated for a moment. It's not just him going away, Whitaker said, nodding toward the gallery, where Yumi was sitting alone, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She's paying for it too, in a way. Delgado followed his gaze, his expression grim. She made her choice. When you cross that line, there's no going back. Whitaker shook his head, picking up his coat. I just can't wrap my head around it. Burying a body for your kid? Lying to the cops? People'll do crazy things for family. That they will, Delgado said, standing and buttoning his jacket. He looked at the empty courtroom, at the faces etched in his memory, the victims, the accused, the grieving families. Sometimes family can be the exact thing that breaks people. As they left the courtroom and stepped into the crisp afternoon air, Delgado allowed himself a rare moment of quiet satisfaction. Justice had been served, but it wasn't enough to erase the lives shattered along the way. Nothing ever was. Profound lessons on humanity. The precinct was quieter than usual. The hum of the coffee machine was the only sound as Detective Delgado stood by the window in the squad room, looking out at the city bathed in the warm orange glow of dusk. For a moment the street seemed peaceful, almost mocking the storm of emotions lingering in his head. The verdict had brought justice, sure, but it hadn't brought peace. Not for the victims, not for the families, and certainly not for him. Whitaker walked in carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. He set one on Delgado's desk before collapsing into the chair across from him. You look like hell, he said, running his hand through his hair. You always know how to cheer me up, Delgado replied dryly, though a faint smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. Seriously though, Whitaker pressed, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees. The case is over, we got the guy. Why the long face? Delgado turned from the window and crossed his arms, his gaze distant. Because I keep thinking about what this case actually means, he said quietly. Kaito, his mom, Hannah, Ryan. All of them. They taught me something I can't shake. Whitaker raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Yeah? What's that? Delgado sighed and sat on the edge of his desk, looking directly at Whitaker. That none of this had to happen, he said. Not a single damn piece of it. If Kaito hadn't let his ambition and pride consume him, if his mom had stopped enabling him, hell, if they'd communicated, really talked to each other, this whole thing could have gone differently. And then there's Ryan and Hannah. If they'd been honest, dealt with their problems together instead of burying them. Maybe we're not standing over shallow graves and courtroom floors. Whitaker sat back, his expression thoughtful. You're saying this is all just bad communication? No, Delgado said sharply, shaking his head. I'm saying this is what happens when people let their wounds fester. When they don't lean on the people they're supposed to trust. We live in a world where everyone's so terrified of looking weak, of asking for help, that they lock themselves in these damn prisons they build in their own heads, and when the walls crack, all that bottled-up pain spills out and people get hurt. Whitaker frowned, rolling his coffee cup between his palms. That's a heavy way to look at it, man. Not everyone can just open up. Sometimes asking for help isn't that simple. I get that, Delgado admitted. But look where holding it in got them. Kaito is in prison for life. His mother? Locked up because she thought protecting him would solve the problem. Ryan broke under pressure, and Hannah... Delgado's voice wavered slightly before he steadied himself. Hannah's gone because neither of them could admit they needed help. Whitaker was silent for a moment, watching his partner with a rare vulnerability in his usually easygoing demeanor. "I mean, you're not wrong," he said finally. "But people screw up, Delgado, even good ones. It's just how we're wired. Doesn't mean the system always has to chew them up for it." "And that's the problem," Delgado shot back, his tone edging on frustration. "We've got systems in place, therapy, social workers, outreach programs. There are resources out there, but nobody wants to use them because we've turned vulnerability into something to be ashamed of. By the time they're desperate enough to ask, it's already too late." Whitaker leaned back, letting out a low whistle. "Damn, you've been sitting on this, huh?" Delgado chuckled humorlessly. "You sit through enough interrogations, enough victim statements, you start to see the pattern. It's always the same. Miscommunication, pride, fear, that's what kills people. Not bullets, not drugs, not knives. Those are just the symptoms." Whitaker sipped his coffee, nodding slowly. "All right, Socrates, I see where you're going. But tell me this. How the hell do you fix that? We're cops, not therapists. What are we supposed to do?" Delgado stared at him for a long moment, the lines on his face deeper than they'd been the day before, as if the weight of the case had aged him overnight. "We can't fix it," he said finally, "not all of it. But what we can do is pay attention, ask questions, look for the cracks before they become chasms. Maybe we can't stop everyone from falling, but sometimes a conversation, one damn conversation, could make all the difference." Whitaker tapped his fingers against the cup, mulling it over. "You think Kaito's mom ever had that conversation with him?" "That's the irony, isn't it?" Delgado said bitterly. "The one person who should have been able to reach him was the one person he manipulated the most. She didn't see the warning signs because she didn't want to. She believed in the version of him she wanted him to be, not the version he actually was, and now, she's paying the price, just like he is." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation pressing down on them. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of red and gold fading into the darkening sky. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Whitaker said suddenly, breaking the silence. "What's that?" Delgado asked. "How this doesn't feel like a win," Whitaker admitted, his voice quieter now. "I mean, we did our jobs, justice was served, but it doesn't feel good, you know? It's like there's no such thing as closure in this job, just endings, and not even good ones at that." Delgado looked at his partner, the faintest hint of a sad smile on his lips. "That's because real justice doesn't bring closure, it just stops things from getting worse. Everything else? That's up to the people left behind." Whitaker nodded, letting the words sink in. "It's a hell of a way to live, isn't it?" "Yeah," Delgado said, standing up and stretching, "but it's the only way we know how." As they packed up and headed for the door, Delgado paused, his hand on the light switch. He looked back at the empty squad room, the desks that had been filled with endless reports and sleepless nights. "Whitaker," he said, his voice softer now. "We can't save everyone, but every now and then if we do this right, maybe we save someone." Whitaker gave him a small nod as they stepped into the quiet hallway. "Let's hope so."